So, I guess the first question that I want to ask, well, first, there's so many themes going on in the 15 minutes that we just watched, but before we explore the themes, I do want to thank all of you for being here and your willingness to celebrate your grandmothers and all the women in your life with us tonight. We're definitely looking forward to hearing all your stories. What are your initial thoughts about them?
Well, my first thought is thank you for doing it. It's wonderful, and to everyone out there, regardless of your background, talk to your relatives and ask them questions, and even better, record it and write things down, because it's amazing how much knowledge goes away when you lose one person. And if you lose more than one person, it's devastating. So I love that you have it documented, and I love that it's multi-generational, and that I just love seeing the grandmothers up there. It was fabulous.
Yes, I also have to say thank you so much for taking time to first acknowledging and recognizing it, and then trying to figure out how to incorporate it into how to take action. And you have done it in a graceful way, and I truly appreciate you taking time to build these relationships and taking the time to come out and share them in a graceful way, because sharing these stories can be very hard when we talk about forgiveness and reconciliation. There's a lot of layers here. So this is an excellent way, in my opinion, to kind of break the ice and start these conversations. And I too, my grandmother, she used to tell me, we're from Reserve, Kansas, out in, that's about 1,300 miles away. And so when we go visit her, she'd always have a camera in her hand, and she always encouraged me to take the pictures. So you'll see at my table, there are just generations of photos back there. And so something like this just truly it warms my heart, so I thank you so much for doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I echo that. Nyaway so much for Nyawegoa for recording this and telling the stories. Like they're incredible, and they're so important so that they don't get lost and that they can pass on to the next 7 generations. But I think too, a lot of the themes, to me, I feel like if you talk to most Indigenous people all across Turtle Island, the themes are so similar. They are so similar. They're foundational into who we are as Indigenous people, as Ungwe, and I mean, the laughter, like that is one thing for sure. Like the laughter, the banter that happens, amongst your cousins that are really more like your siblings. But even with your aunties and your uncles, even your my grandmother, she was hysterical. But the laughter is so significant. And I've always said, I laugh. Nowhere else in my life do I laugh like I do when I'm with my family. And we're either on the res or off the res, but there is nothing that compares to that.
Thank you. And a nice segue talking about family, grandmothers. And my first question is, what does motherhood mean to all of you? All of you are mothers. So before we talk about grandmothers, what does motherhood mean to all of you?
Sure.
Well, motherhood wouldn't mean much to me without my own mother and grandmother and my ancestors prior to that. So motherhood is, the one thing I knew from when I was a young girl, I always wanted in my life. So my 2 children, and my rainbow children too, give me such incredible purpose. And my children are truly my life's heartbeat. There is nothing I would not do for them. And I never would have imagined, but my life and the steps that I walk out, I find that I do that in a very tangible way. When I am advocating for the preservation of our Indigenous rights, and it even seems a little bit absurd that some of those get challenged in this day and age, in 2024 and even in years previous. But the other thing too is that I wouldn't be able to do that again without my mother and my grandmother. So I take it very seriously that I stand on their shoulders, and I couldn't live with myself if I didn't use all the wherewithal within me to stand for the preservation of our Indigenous rights and our culture and our traditions and our language, because I stand on the shoulders of my mother and my grandmother. My grandmother was a residential school survivor. I call her a thriver. My mom was disenfranchised for over 20 years. That's just a sampling of some of what they had gone through, but the immense strength that they bore. I mean, residential school was just one thing my grandmother had gone through, and she was this little bitty Mohawk woman, but man, was she fierce. Incredibly, incredibly fierce. So kind of fitting, I guess one of the cards I got this year for Mother's Day, that was one of the words on the front, like she is so, I can't remember the other one, she's so powerful and she is so fierce and she's so something else, but yeah, I take very seriously that I stand on their shoulders. And the other thing too is that as I walk out my convictions in what I feel so just completely immersed in, and what is so immense in my life of standing up for our Indigenous rights, there's times I forget, but I'm also creating a pathway for the next 7 generations. You know, I want my daughter to be able to pick up that mantle and stand on my shoulders and stand on her grandmother and her great-grandmother's shoulders. And I want my son to be able to do the same thing, and their children and their children's children. Because it is, yeah, it slips away with every elder that we have who journeys on.
I'm very blessed today to have my mom right there. And my 2 kids. Recently I was asked a question: who is the strongest woman in your life? And I immediately said, oh, it's my mother. They're like, try again. I was like, grandma? Try again. I was like, my daughter? Try again. Myself? They're like, try again. They're like, no, Mother Nature. And so that caused me, I was like, oh man, you are so right. You are so right. There is this she teaches us there's this relationship that we have with the land, which she births us and she protects us, she nurtures us. And in this way of thinking, when we take ourselves, what is it? Westernized ways of thinking, colonized ways of thinking, settler ways of thinking, we put humans first, right? It's this triangle, like we're at this top, but really we need to be in this circle where we are in a relationship with each other. And when I think about that, I also think about the relationships that I have with my mother, the relationship that we had with my grandmother, the relationship that my mother had with her grandmother, the relationship that I have with my sister. And there's this connection where we help to lift each other up and we help to feed into each other. And what I love about that is that we're continuing to pour into my children's lives, and they're continuing to pour into others' lives. And so when it comes to motherhood, I really think it comes about nurturing and protecting and preserving and building relationships.
What motherhood means to me, I think, is everything. It's the number one important job not just me, but every mother out there, and indeed parenting, because there's all kinds of parents these days, and it is the number one job. And part of parenting, of course, is teaching, and so that goes well with what I do in my day job is teaching. It's really easy to do things for your children, especially when they're little, but it's more important to teach them how to do things for themselves. And the earlier they learn that, the better it is for them and the better it is for the world. And it's just so important to pass on the right values to our children. And the right values these days are thinking about Mother Earth and nature, and as Angelina just said, not putting humans first, which is what has been done and has gotten us where we are, which is not in a very good place right now. So valuing all of our relations out there. I mean, we consider the trees to be our relations, and teaching that to the children so that they will be healthier human beings and appreciate that, be happier human beings, and hopefully teach their friends and pass that on and see how lucky we really all are. The other piece to the Thanksgiving address is, as I was saying that, what I should have reminded you of at the end is that if you think every day, because we're supposed to say the Thanksgiving address, if only to ourselves, every day, if you really think about what we have, what each individual has, what we have as a collective, we have so much. We have more than enough, most of us. And then if you realize that, then you want less. And if you want less, that's better for you and it's better for the environment.
Thank you. So you all have touched on the relationship of how your grandmothers, your mothers, your ancestors have influenced your ways of mothering, or your thoughts of mothering, or how that there's really no separation, which makes a lot of sense. We do have pictures here behind us. So if we start with Trish's mother and grandmothers. Trish, when you see these pictures, and I know this is a big piece of remnants, what are some thoughts or stories or what comes to mind in terms of the influence or what you carry with you in terms of what you've learned from these women?
Oh my gosh.
Beautiful pictures.
Yes, I am very, very fortunate to have these photographs. Unfortunately, I personally did not know anyone but my mother. My grandmother passed just the year before I was born, so I never personally knew her, and I really wish that I had. And then what's interesting when you put all these pictures together and you look at them is that Nancy lived to be over 100. She had no birth certificate, but non-native anthropologists and all kinds of people interviewed her, and she remembers the burning of Buffalo and a lot of major events, and by judging how old she was at the time, they determined her age. And so some say she lived to be 108, others say 112, some even push it farther than that, but she lived to be clearly over 100. And so when you think of what she experienced, what she saw, what she knew, and I have my grandmother's timelines up here because it's too much for me to remember, and I am lousy with dates. I love history, but I'm terrible with dates, so I bring their timelines with me. And then Carrie Jones, and so she was a medicine woman and a midwife. And Carrie Jones was also a medicine woman and a midwife, and you can see she was out gathering medicine that day with her dog. I don't know her dog's name. When I show this to children always want to know the dog's name. Gia means dog in Onondaga. But Carrie Jones lived to be in, I believe, her 90s. And then Grace, my grandmother. Grace went to 3 boarding schools, including Carlisle. Grace only lived to be 50-something. So you can see each one, after colonization and with more and more settler influences, lived a shorter life. She, having spent a tremendous amount of time in boarding schools, had the shortest life. And you find that with people who were in boarding schools is because they were malnourished, mistreated, many died there, many died there. And then after getting out, there was a lot of alcoholism and drug abuse, as well as suicide. So the boarding school system was horrible. And then I'm happy to say that my mother worked her way through college. She graduated from Cortland State, and she lived to be 92. So we went on the upswing again. Better nutrition, and my mother could have gone to boarding school and would have gone to boarding school if she stayed on Tonawanda on a reservation. But her mother, Grace, did not want any of her children to attend boarding school. It was so horrific for her. So they moved off of the reservation to Rochester to avoid that. And so that's why my mother and all her brothers and sisters did not go to boarding school, but her cousins did from Tonawanda. So all of her contemporary cousins did go to boarding school, and they all lived shorter lives than my mother, and they also didn't accomplish things that my mother accomplished. She accomplished a lot in her life. And it's not that they were lesser people, lesser intelligent, not as hardworking. No, it was none of those things. It was not only had they not been given the opportunities that my mother worked for and achieved, but that they were told that they were less than and beaten down for a huge portion of their life, especially when they were young, which is so detrimental. So when I look at these pictures, I'm proud. I see tremendous amount of strength. And one of the things that I like to say when I speak to an audience is that everyone up here and everyone out there that has Native blood were meant to not be here tonight. The genocide that was put on Indigenous people was horrific. And when I look at each of these women, I'm like, how did they survive? How did they make it? Because even though my mother lived to 92, achieved a lot of things, went to college, and had a wonderful life, she had a really rough life growing up. And so yeah, the cards were definitely stacked against them, but they're thrivers.
No, I thank you. There's also pictures along the wall here too. Same women.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you. Who's next? Angelina. Mom and grandmother family photo. What comes up for you?
We had just moved my grandma back to the reservation. This is on our res in Native housing, and that's where she wanted to be. And this was the last photo that I have of her before she passed, about a little less than a year later. There's my baby boy, Elijah, and my daughter Ezra, and my mother, who are all here. You can see Ezzy. She's just an itty bitty thing. Ezzy's first trip to the reservation was when I was, 7 months pregnant. Elijah's first trip was when he was 3 months old. And so, for me, this is like going home. At least once a year, all while growing up, we would make a trek back home. either in the summer. Our powwows were later in the year, so I never got to experience any of our powwows while we still had them. They paused them for a while, and I don't know if they're going to bring them back, but my hope is that someday I get to go back and be a part of bringing all of this stuff back to life. My grandma was born on the reservation along with all of her siblings. And this past summer, I got to go back and vote as an adult for the first time on our council. And some of my fond memories are going back in the summer and going in the gymnasium and running around as a kid while my grandma is participating in council votes. And she always said just to make sure to always come back and participate. And the thing about our tribe is that in order to really be involved, you have to, just like the grandmas in the movie, like, we're out of state, so there's only so much that we can do. And also, our tribe is very small. We have less than 500 members that are dispersed all over the states. And so as far as like bringing everybody back, or as far as like communications, we don't have a lot of elders left. My grandma was one, and she has one sister left, and she's gonna be 84. I think she just turned 84 like last week. So my mother and I are actually really trying very hard about being intentional about me. She lives in Arizona, so we're being intentional about reaching out and asking questions. And she's been so great to be like, you know what? I'm an open book. Ask away. And so we're starting to ask some of these tough questions that, like, I wish I could ask my grandma now, because I didn't know about the residential school survivors until after the graves were unreached. And then I started doing research. And she went to Haskell. When she went, you know, it was shared with me that she enjoyed it, but years before it was modeled after Carlisle. So I know that at one point it wasn't good. But yeah, this picture means a lot to me. It means the world to me. Like I said, it's the last one that I have of her alive in our family photo.
Thank you. And Ronnie.
Wow. So that's Granny, Helen. Oh, first Helen. And this is probably her prior to her going to residential school. So she went to the Mohawk Institute, which we refer to as the Mush Hole. And the reason we refer to it as the Mush Hole is because that was what all the children were fed. And that was the only thing that they were fed, was mush. And some of, us may be familiar to like, oh, well, mush isn't so bad. You can put maple syrup on it or brown sugar or whatever, but that was not the case. Oftentimes, this mush had bugs crawling in it or worms. So that's why we refer to it as the mush hole. But this is Granny. And she, like I said, is a fierce Mohawk woman. So she was in residential school from anywhere from 10 to 11 years. She never talked about it. She only talked about it a few times, and it was only with a few people in the family. And so I had known for years of her escaping once, and that was all that I knew. But later being like only within the last 5 years or so, I had come to learn that she had actually escaped multiple times. And the one time that I knew of that she escaped, it was in December. So my home nation is only 3 hours from here, so geographically, right, it's the same climate. And in December, you're escaping from this hellhole, really, and this residential school. So you're only escaping with what you have on you. And from the school to her home was anywhere from probably 12 to 15 miles. And, I'm sure you weren't taking the road because you probably would have been caught. And so anyway, this one story that I know of the time she escaped, she had made it all the way back home. And again, as I've told before, I'm sure she's thinking, like, all I have to do is just make it home to mom, to safety, right? Mom is always safety. But unfortunately, when she had gotten home, her mom took her and put her in the horse and buggy. They didn't have a car, and took her back to the hell she just escaped from. Why? We don't know. That part she never talked about. We can only surmise that there were threats that were made because it was actually law. It was law that existed that allowed for the removal of our children from our homes, from our communities, from our families, to be placed into these schools. So whatever, tragedy were to befall you, if you didn't take your child back, we don't know what that was. If it was jail time, if it was death that was threatened, if it was, well, we'll come in and take the rest of your children, we don't know. So anyway, I've come to learn that, like I said, in the last 5 years, there were actually multiple times that she had escaped. I had learned recently, because actually the Mushhole, the Mohawk Institute, is one of the last residential schools that's actually still in existence. A lot of them were torn down because it was evidence. And so this is one that is still existing, and it's actually being turned into a museum, thankfully. Now it's called the Woodland Cultural Center. And they had a campaign for many years that was called Save the Evidence. So you could, make contributions to save the evidence. So as they were going through the school and saving as much evidence as they could, there were a couple things that they found. One was that the school was constructed in a very colonial manner, like a typical center entrance. There was the boys' side, the girls' side, they all looked very similar. They had these huge stairwells, and if you can imagine, under a stairwell, especially like a schoolish type stairwell, there's a huge space. Well, those spaces got enclosed, and what we had learned through the Save the Evidence is that if you had run away and you came back, that they enclosed that space with a little wee door on it, and that is where you went. That was like your punishment. For how long? Nobody knows. Was it a day? Was it an hour? Was it 2 weeks, 2 months? Nobody knows. But anyway, I think it just speaks to first of all, the survivor, like, oh yeah, thanks, right? There's the school there. The survivor that is just in our DNA, and that it didn't matter that she got caught once or twice, right? She was still trying to escape this pure imprisonment. But she then went on to have 13 children, and when she was raising her children, she married my grandfather. My grandfather was Mississauga the Credit First Nation, so Anishinaabe. But our reservations border each other, and there's a whole story behind that. But nonetheless, that's where they chose to raise their family. And I'm sure it was pretty intentional, because maybe the children were more protected there. Because Six Nations, they were like right outside of where the Mushhole was. So fortunately, she fiercely protected her children, and thankfully, my mom and all of her siblings, none of them had to endure residential school. However, there was so much of their culture that they didn't have, though, because my grandmother being there for 11-ish years, that was all taken away from her. So she couldn't pass on our language, she couldn't pass on our dances or songs, all of our other traditions. So as a result, my mom was always very encouraging to me in my adult life. It's like she had this recognition that my brother and I, our generation, we had this capability of, like, maybe for the first time that she was ever able to see, and certainly my granny was ever able to see, that we could actually embrace our culture and not be afraid and not be ashamed, and we could be proud and we could thrive actually ourselves by embracing our culture. Just the residential school was a smattering. You know, living through a marriage of, you know, many, many years, probably almost 60. But all the intergenerational traumas that happen as a result of residential school and all of the atrocities that happened to our ancestors prior to that. So the alcoholism, the domestic violence, a lot of those things that she endured, but yet she was still the most loving woman. Like everybody on the res referred to her as Granny. she was Granny to everyone. And then my mom, who was actually named after her mom, but everybody knew her as Janet. Oh my God, she's like stunning. She would tell me too, because she would always get asked, "What are you?" Right? Like when she was younger. And so she would tell me, she's like, you know, at some point, she goes, I just ended up saying, well, I'm Polynesian, because she thought it sounded like exotic and like, you know, fun. And then here's the two of them. That was actually a picture taken at our wedding. And I was so fortunate that Granny was able to be here, to witness that, to be a part of it. Yeah, I mean, there's so much more I could say, but it's, you know, because of their strength, again, that I'm able to stand on their shoulders and do what I do today, and then hopefully pass that on to my children, and they'll do even greater things that I've been able to do. My daughter's kind of on her way doing that a little bit. Oh yeah, I just wanted to make a mention of this. So I'm part of like Save the Evidence with the Mohawk Institute. This was one thing that they had uncovered, and these were the desks that were used. I mean, I use this word school mildly because it really wasn't that. It was, you know, to teach boys agriculture so they could work in the field, and it was to teach girls domestication so, you know, they could be enslaved the rest of their lives. But anyway, there were these desks, and so what they found was, like, they noticed on all of these desks the numbers, and it would just be numbers. So like here it's 56 plus 2, or maybe 29, but there was never like an equals, because, right, that's exactly where maybe your thoughts go to, is you see a number plus another number, it's supposed to equate to something. Well, what they learned was that essentially it was identities. So when the children were first brought to the residential schools, every aspect of their identity was taken away from them. So their hair was cut, they were all given, you know, very militaristic type uniforms. Everybody looked the same. And you were forbidden to speak your language, but you were also stripped of your identity. So you were no longer called by your name, you were called by the number that was given to you. So when they found these numbers, you know, could it have been a young girl or a young boy that was writing their number plus like their crush's number, right? So right when we're school kids and we do that, but we write out our names because that's our identity. So to know that they had taken on this identity that intensely as a number, I mean, I think it's just a smattering to show the immense trauma that was imposed and the immense stripping away of not only our culture, but our identity too at the same time.
There's a book on that, a number in the back if you have it in the back. It's a children's book, and it's very hard to look at, but those are one of the things that I think we have to be brave and courageous enough to do that, to take that step, to see things that we don't really want to.
Yeah, there's a production. It's actually called The Mush Hole, and it's supposed to be coming here next month. Maybe Trish, you can talk more about that. But I remember when my daughter and I went to go see it, the first time it was stateside, it was at UB. And so we went maybe a year and a half or so ago. And I knew it was gonna be immense and I knew it was gonna be a lot, but I really wasn't prepared for just how intense. I'm so glad we went together because we had each other. We kind of like sobbed through the whole thing and we're falling on each other. But anyway, I think the one thing that immediately took our breath away was and I'm not giving away too much, but like as soon as the curtains open or the lights came on or whatever, there are bricks and the bricks have numbers on them. It's meant to, symbolize. And then one of the numbers was the grandmother, or the number that we have come to learn was my grandmother's number. And that just like took my breath away. So and that school closed only as recent as 1970. That is only a touch point away from where we are in 2024. And in the very northern reaches of Canada, the last residential school closed only as recent as 1996 or 1997. Either way, still, just a breath away from where we are right now. So this is still very prevalent and recent in, the history of Turtle Island. So hence, all more need to be sure that these things our stories are being documented, that the truths are being told, that the mistruths are being retold as truths. In education, in forms like this, in film, in picture, in books, whatever it might be, our stories are matter and they're significant.
I don't know if you want to talk more about the mush hole coming.
Kendall, do you know the dates for the mush hole? Because it's at RIT, correct?
So it's on Thursday, June 27th, Panera Theater. There's a matinee at 2 p.m. and there's a show at 7.
And that's on the NTID side of campus, the Panera Theater, and it's a lovely, lovely theater. And especially it's wonderful if you do need, if you have a hearing impairment, it's acoustically set up for that. So we encourage you to come, and it's in correlation with Ganondagan and Jiva Theater and RIT. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing all of that information. I think at this point, I will open it up to the audience. If anyone has any questions or wants to say a few words. I don't know if Catherine wants to say anything. Let's put you on the spot. I put Catherine on the spot everywhere we go. But if anyone has any questions or wants to share.
Basically, it's a question for you and the movie. How did the two young men get involved? I'm sure they weren't coerced. It was something they really wanted to do. Were they studying? Were they questioning their own roots? Or was it because they obviously have good relationships with their grandmas?
Yeah. I don't know if they were questioning until I started questioning them, but they were friends with my son, and they were on the same soccer team. And actually, I'll just divulge that one day Chris was hanging out with my son, and he started telling me about a powwow we went to, and I was like, "What? What are you talking about?" And from there, it kind of just he started to share his culture with me, and then I started talking to his mom. And then I started talking to their parents, and what did you do? Did you arm wrestle him? Were you just like, you're gonna do this, Bill? I mean, I guess maybe that might be a better question for Catherine, because.
Yeah, I don't think I really forced him or anything, but again, we were on the soccer field and just talking, and it just kind of came out that, well, yes, my family is from Oneida, and Kevin's family is also, and like, really? And then as we started talking about it and talking with the boys, because at the time, we go to West Veronica, our boys, seniors this year, but they were doing a flag that was raised previously, and then also they started doing the land acknowledgement. And we we're just talking about if the land acknowledgement was being given at every event like they talked about doing, and kind of just several parents just talking about that in the sporting events and stuff, and the boys started talking about how it's represented in schools, how much is being taught in the classroom, and again, they have different perspective because of their grandmothers and their family, and so it kind of just grew from there. And so when Courtney kind of proposed this to them, they're kind of like, oh, okay. I don't think they really thought it was gonna come of it, until she kind of showed up with the camera, and then like, yep, okay, this is the day. But they were agreeable. I mean, they're kind of, they don't really want all the attention for it, but they did it willingly.
Did they write their own questions, or was that something you helped them with, Courtney?
Definitely needed some help. Teenage boys, yeah, they need some help.
More power to them.
They did do a great job, and the most beautiful thing I think that came out of this project is the friendships afterwards, and they've stayed pretty tight, and it's been nice to continue to see them and run into them and talk to them, and they don't want the attention, neither do the grandmas either. They really don't want the attention at all. So it's just been a very rewarding experience to see the growth. In fact, when we get to finish the film, you will see on film the first time that Johnny actually sees a picture of his grandfather, who was a chief in full regalia. So there are a lot of pieces of this film that I'm very happy are documented forever. But it was a very rewarding experience.
You mentioned that you teach a class. Are there other schools or that teach anything? And I have not heard anything about any schools teaching anything about reservations and treatment.
Yeah, so 27 states of the United States do not have anything on Native Americans in their curriculum. 0, except for maybe Thanksgiving, and then it's incorrect. Of the schools that do teach Indigenous history, it's basically a little bit in 4th grade, and then maybe like 8th grade, the Trail of Tears, and everything that's taught is like the 1800s is the latest they go. And so consequently, in 2014, a study was done, and it came out that 87% of high school graduates, 87% believe that Native Americans are extinct, that there are no Native Americans. Now that probably has changed with No DAPL and all the walking for water and water protectors and everything that's been going on, and we've been getting more publicity and in the news. But 87% thinking that all Native Americans are extinct. But if you look at the curriculum that's there, which is very, very slight, it's all, they played lacrosse, they lived in long houses, they ate corn. It's very cursory, but it's all past tense. Well, we play lacrosse, we still eat corn, nobody lives in a long house, but we still have long houses. And that's where we meet for our ceremonies. What I teach is I teach nursery through 12th grade at the Harley School, and I actually developed the curriculum. I got a grant to write the curriculum last summer, and then I said, well, what happens after I write the curriculum? And they said, well, sometimes we implement it, sometimes it sits on a shelf, and then, and I said, well, how about if I implement it? And so kudos to the Harley School. They said, you can run with it. And so consequently, I tell stories and take the kindergartners on nature hikes. We do water testing of AP biology and talk about the native species. And we have a thing called Freshman Experience, where we actually bring a reduced version of the witness to injustice blanket exercise in. And so we did a fun lacrosse unit in PE, and so we've really had fun with it. And I also have to not only say kudos to the school, but all of the faculty, because it all happened like kind of fast. And so you figure all those other faculty have their curriculum already written. They know what they're going to do for the rest of the school year. And then I come in and say, hey, I want to work with all of you doing something. And I've worked with over, I would say 80% of our faculty members pushing into their classroom or taking their classroom outside or doing something with them. And it's great because our teachers are now teaching Louise Erdrich books and all sorts of Native authors and things like that. So we're touching everything from history to science to literature and everything in between. So it's really been a wonderful experience. And this was a trial this school year, but they've already told me they're doing it next year. So we're keeping it rolling.
Great.
I am from Arizona and grew up right next to the Gila River Reservation, and I was wondering if any, well, you kind of touched about this already, about different states have different curriculum, but I was interested to hear more about any impressions about what it's like to be Native today in different parts of the U.S.
It's an interesting question. I know you're not native in a different part of the US, but.
Well, I guess
Yeah,
sure.
sure.
Yeah. Well, one thing, I know this is like we're telling our truths, and I get it's heavy and it's hard, but we can't change that. It is. So I guess I was just gonna share something that's on a positive note, and that is something maybe to be celebrated. It's hard to share too, because we're not very boastful, like that's not how we're taught. But my daughter, she's worked hard, and she's a lacrosse player. Our educational journey has been way more tumultuous than we ever anticipated it to be, but she is away for school and she plays lacrosse there. But over recent years, she's also had the opportunity to play for the Haudenosaunee Nationals. And over the last year, she's been trying out for the U20 team. And so the end of January, early February, she found out that she made it. And it's incredible because for her, every time she steps on the field, it has such different meaning than, I don't know, I mean, I don't mean to sound cross or anything, but than maybe a player from dominant culture. And every time she steps on the field, she knows that she's honoring her grandmother and her great-grandmother. And, I'm sure her great-grandmother couldn't, in her wildest dreams, right, being a residential school survivor, imagine that she would be able to play lacrosse in this manner. And then the other thing too is that whenever she plays with her sisters on the Haudenosaunee Nationals, I mean, there's just a coming together and a fluidness and just such a natural fit that is, in all of her years playing, she doesn't experience anywhere else. So anyway, our girls are competing in Worlds. I mean, they compete in Worlds every 2 years. But this summer, Worlds is set to take place in Hong Kong in August. So we're really rooting for our Haudenosaunee girls to, do our ancestors incredibly proud, as they do anyway.
Congrats to her, yeah.
So some good news.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you brought up different areas because we're all on the Indigenous Peoples Day Committee here in Rochester, and our focus to this point and what we've been able to give to, everything's free. Please come and join us. It's all day long from sunrise to sunset, And what we've been mostly sharing at this point is Haudenosaunee traditions, Haudenosaunee people, dancers and everything. But it's Indigenous Peoples Day, so we really want to honor indigeneity from all walks of life. And this year we think we're going to branch out and be able to do that some more with the help of Kendall and students at RIT and technology, so it's going to be really fun. But a couple of points that I want to make about Indigenous people all around the world is that so much of our technology and knowledge comes from them originally, like aspirin, and the list goes on and on. I mean, think about a canoe. Everybody takes a canoe for granted. Oh, it's a cool thing, it's fun, right? Well, think about that. It was originally made from everything that you just found in the woods. A lot of people think of birch bark canoes, of which canoes were made out of different materials, but birch bark was perfect. Why? Because it's water repellent, which is why you can also start a fire when it's raining if you have birch bark. If you get a hole in it, which they were very durable, but if you hit a rock, you could patch it with what's growing in the woods. And it was very small, so you could go in a very, very narrow creek, but also with a draft of like 4 to 8 inches, depending on the size of the canoe. So I mean, think about, we just had the horrible crash of the ship into the bridge in Maryland, and those ships have a draft of 50 to 80 feet. I mean, which, so they carry a lot of stuff, but I mean, think of a canoe. You can go virtually everywhere with it. And then when you can't go someplace, you put it on your shoulders and off you go across land, and you can carry a canoe. It weighs, a really nicely built birch bark canoe weighs about what a 7-year-old weighs. So you can put it on your shoulders along with everything else that you're carrying, go to the place and put it back in. So the technology, I mean, people think of things primitive, but the technology and the knowledge that Indigenous people around the world have is incredible, and our society is currently benefiting not only from the land they're on, but also from a lot of that knowledge, and it's not acknowledged. Also, we shared a lot of things and traded a lot of things. So if you have studied Native people, like just in the United States, for instance, you're used to seeing, the longhouses up here and the teepees out here and the igloos up here, and you just think of them in their little silos. And it wasn't like that at all. We knew that the folks who had the teepees could travel around a little bit, but you think the longhouse people stay put. And to a certain degree we did, but there was a lot of trading and a lot more travel than what is taught or what is typically thought, and a lot of sharing of that knowledge. And so when you think of the different territories, you think of, a map of the United States with the states delineated out in blue and pink and yellow. And ours was more of a watercolor because we did have our own territories and we did protect our own territories, but they overlapped and they intermeshed. So if there was a yellow territory here and a blue territory here, there was a green area, and that green area was a shared area. A shared area for gathering medicines, for gathering foods, and for hunting or fishing, and that was okay. And that goes back to one of our first treaties with, and it was the Haudenosaunee with the Anishinaabe and Ojibwa and the people of the Great Lakes area, and that was the one bowl, one spoon. And one bowl, one spoon meant that we're all eating out of the same bowl with the same spoon, so we have to take care of that. And I know after COVID that has like a little bit of a negative feel to it, but if you think, if I go out and I hunt more than I need to hunt, which we were always taught, and so people have different languages, different customs, different traditions all across the US. They live in different geographies, so that makes sense all across Turtle Island. But there's also a lot of tremendous similarities. And one of the similarities is that we're all taught you never take the first. So if you go out hunting or gathering and you see a special mushroom or a berry or a plant and you see it, you don't take the first because that might be the only one. And consequently, you don't take the last. And you don't take more than you need. And that's a good way to live. And that is, from up north, down south, and all the way across. And so we have a lot of differences, but we have more similarities, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you, Trish. I wanted, did Kendall or Catherine's Oneida, Wisconsin, Kendall, did you want to respond to that question at all? Because you're not Haudenosaunee?
And we had a question way in the back
Yes.
too.
So I work with lots of Indigenous students from all across the United States, South America, and I usually view indigeneity as walking in two worlds, but now I see it as a spectrum, and you learn different areas at different times. So sometimes we have students that aren't connected with their culture, and some that are very connected with their culture, and it's about learning and reconnecting and understanding, and that's what's important when working with Indigenous students. So I came from Oklahoma, and there's 39 federally recognized tribes in the state of Oklahoma. I think Arizona has 19. But Oklahoma is diverse because you have tribes from the southwest, northwest, northeast. So Oklahoma was originally called Indian Territory, and it was a location that was chosen to send all the tribes that they wanted to remove. So I grew up learning about stickball from the Cherokees, Chickasaw, Choctaws, learning song dances in Muskogee Creek, learning how to ride a horse in the Comanches. So I've garnered all this knowledge, and I've taken it here to Rochester, and I can share it. And it's a learning experience because my advisor in college, she was Lakota, and she taught me about the 7 virtues of fortitude, strength, knowledge, prayer, all these other skills. And now I'm here in Haudenosaunee learning about the one bowl, one spoon wampum. So as I go along in my journey, I'm picking up all these Indigenous values. And I'm very thankful for that. So I can share that with my students. So that's a good question. But what is it like to be Indigenous from a different state? So to be Indigenous from a different state, come here is learning about these different cultures and these different values. I think it's very important. So thank you for your question.
Thank you, Kendall. Did you want to say anything just from going to? No. Okay. Yeah. No.
Sure.
Okay.
I was just gonna add that there's so many different Indigenous tribes and nations, and you learn about one, but there's so many other different aspects of it. So again, I teach 4th grade, and again, definitely had to, start off with, do you know anyone who is Indigenous? And again, they do think most of them have died until they, start being a little more into the culture and the learning, but they again have the stereotypes of everyone lives in a teepee, and that there's so many different ways that people can live, different homes that they have, different languages they speak, different dances that they have. So just kind of being open to the number of different ways that people live, not just Indigenous, but everyone around the world also, that we all have our own stories.
One more question, and then.
Hi, just a local question. It's a little bit about the different areas, because I know there was different reservations within different areas when the United States were pushing people, into an area. And so my question is around, because me personally, not knowing my own heritage, and I know pieces of it, but is there a central point where you can kind of figure out where, your folks came from?
That's a real tough one. I think I am an enrolled member of the Sac and Fox Nation in Missouri and Kansas and Nebraska, and I know that my mom made sure to enroll me. But there are folks who come to, if I don't continue this work and try to share this knowledge with my children, and my children don't take this and share it on with their children, then very soon there is going to be that question of where did we come from, right? Ancestry.com, it has some information, but if you take a DNA test and it says that you're Indigenous, it won't tell you from what nation or whereabouts. It keeps it very vague. So it can be, I can empathize with how difficult to start the journey might be, but I would, and these other ladies can also share, but I would start, if I had to take the journey, if I know anything, I would reach out to that nation specifically, because you gotta go there, because there's records, but there's records everywhere. Like Kansas University, I know, has records for Sac and Fox, and there's just archives. But yeah, I think it's hard. It's hard.
Do you have anything to add?
Just about like a recent discovery of our clan, like all that information that was taken away from us too.
Yeah, that is tough, and I'm going to look into that more now that you've asked. Each reservation or nation do try and keep track in various ways. Some of them are still handwritten in ledger books. Some of them are just in spiral notebooks and manila folders, and then some are on the computer. So it varies tremendously from nation to nation. But if you have any inkling of idea like where, that would be the place to start. But if you don't know where that is, I don't know where to send you, but I will do some research. Kendall, do you have any information?
So this is, actually said, it's a hard question to answer because each tribe is a sovereign nation and they all have their own requirements. Some are matrilineal, like the Haudenosaunee. Some are blood quantum. So you have to prove that you're 1/4, 1/16, 1/8. Or some of them are done through the Dawes Act enrollment. So when they moved the tribes west, they kept a record of everyone from 1830 to 1860 that were moved. And you got to prove one of your ancestors was on that list. So that's what the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Sioux Creek, Seminole, and the Delaware tribe. That's how they keep their records. But if you do a DNA test, like Angela said, it won't tell you which specific tribe, and you would have to do some family history, figure out where you're from, and then maybe go through state records. I know that in like 1860, they had said non-tax exempt Indian as a race, or they put them as black. So it's really hard to say if you go through that route. But most tribes have genealogical departments that can help you out with that if you're interested. So if you're like from like the southeast part of the United States, you think that you might be Cherokee, you can contact Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, and they can help you track your genealogical chart to see if you're eligible to enroll. But yeah, it's a very difficult question to answer, and the research is huge.
Yeah, and I was just going to say the same thing. What Ronnie said is it's intentional. Just like with African Americans and enslavement, it's almost impossible to trace your roots because of that brick wall of being named after the slave owner and things like that. And then with Native Americans, there was so much erasure originally, and it was intentional. So it's tough.
One thing that I would say is that if there are any oral stories, there's tradition in your family or stories, listen to them. Because that is one way, I know that is one way that the traditions and the stories are being held, that they're being passed down. But colonialism and, our European culture will very much try to invalidate stories. But I would say if there are stories, listen to them and then use them as for clues to try to find and get into those other areas that we just talked about. That's one way to start that journey.
I'll share quickly, like our journey, my daughter playing for the Haudenosaunee Nationals took us on a journey to really discover our clan. So because my grandmother was a residential school thriver, again, all of that information was taken away and it was lost during that time. So as Haudenosaunee,
It wasn't lost.
right, yes, exactly, yeah, that's right, I stand corrected, it was not lost, it was taken, it was stolen, absolutely. And I know as Trish has explained before too, like not, as Haudenosaunee, not having your clan is like the equivalent of not having your last name. Like that's how much of our identity is wrapped up in that. So anyway, so her journey took us to that discovery. And so working with Six Nations, it was the end of December. It was like a few days before Christmas, I got an email and it was just one line, one sentence, and it said confirmed Mohawk Nation Wolf Clan. And when so it had her name, then it had my name, but when I saw my mom's name and my grandmother's name with our clan, that's what really took my breath away, because they've journeyed on. I'm sure they knew, but for them not to be able to experience that here, but then to receive that confirmation was just like such an incredible gift. So keep digging, keep asking the questions, keep doing the research, keep finding out the stories. Yeah, you'll get there.
And then also with boarding school, not only were people given numbers instead of names, but their names were changed. So if they had an indigenous name, of course that wouldn't do. So they were given, the name Betty or whatever. But they were their last names were just doled out. So there would be like Smith, 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 Bailey, 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 Parker, Parker, Parker. They would just distribute names like, penny candy or something. It was ridiculous. So that muddled the waters even further. But the one point that I want to make is, as we wrap up, is that the two grandmothers in the film had such different experiences, knowledge of their background, lack of knowledge of their background, which was no fault of her own. And up here we have a tremendous variety of knowing your history, not knowing your history, and seeking it out. And that's one of the things that you'll find in meeting with Indigenous people around the world, but especially on Turtle Island, is that there's tremendous amount of similarities again, heartbreaking similarities, but there's also an extreme uniqueness to each of their experiences and knowledge.
Well stated. Oh, I don't, do we have enough time for another question? Is the library closed? All right, we'll do one more question and then we will definitely wrap it up.
So I know from viewing through the Facebook pages, I know the Mohawk have been trying to keep their language, and they've actually done classes teaching their language on the res. And I know my friend is Tuscarora, and she is, once again, trying to preserve as much of that heritage as possible. Has there been more programs in trying to protect the language? I mean, I ran into this in Cape Breton, and they were like, we've got to teach Gaelic, and they did. They taught Gaelic, and it didn't get lost. And I just want to make sure that that's preserved.
Yeah, there are efforts because it's not traditional to like document our language, right? Because it's oral. So there are efforts to make sure that they're still there, because we recognize, well, I mean, I can speak for Haudenosaunee that especially with some of our languages where there's maybe just a smattering of first language speakers that are still alive, we know that there's a risk of that language being lost, because once those elders pass on and journey on, then that, it's not only the language that goes with them, but it's also all the knowledge and our culture. And so much of our culture is embedded in our language. So it's important, yeah.
Also those code talkers. Those code talkers saved our butts. as generations?
Yeah, when you asked about schools, I should have said that there are a lot of schools on Native territory that are Native run, and language is a huge part of them. So Akwesasne has a wonderful program, Onondaga does, Tonawanda has a school on our territory, and on and on. So they're not on every nation, but there are a lot of them, and they start them off when the kids are tiny. And so consequently, on some of our territories, the little people speak more of our language and better than the adults and elders, which is sad and happy at the same time, but it's, you know, it's headed in the right direction. And then it instills in even the adults that did go to boarding school, gets them speaking again, because you know, I make a point of saying that we didn't lose our language, or we didn't lose our tradition. It was stolen from us. It was beaten out of us, starved out of us. And like my grandmother, she spoke fluent Onondaga and did until her dying day. She was called impertinent and impudent, and she was, you know, she had to kneel on pencils for a certain period of time as one of her things. She had to scrub sidewalks because she spoke her language. And then to go through 3 boarding schools and hang on to your language and still be fluent, but then not teach it to your children because her husband, who was German, refused to let her speak it to her children. So it, even though she held on to it, it died there. So I was going someplace with this and I forgot where I was going. Anyway, so the language is being taught. It is, in some nations, it's growing, it's tremendous. We just passed May 4th, may the 4th be with you. So there's in the Navajo, there was somebody that was like a crazy Star Wars person, and so they have a whole Star Wars that's all done in Navajo. And it isn't just somebody doing, like one person doing voiceovers, like they got all these people to do it, and you know, and it's awesome. And consequently their language has like blossomed. Like there's 160,000 Navajo speakers now or something. So it's really growing. So it's crazy what Star Wars can do.
And speaking of that too, and it just sounds, I mean, I don't know my language, unfortunately. We don't really have it, but I do know that we are from Algonquin speaking, because we at one point were up here. So like that whole with the out-of-state tribe, like we don't think about the states because we've moved all over and have lived all over. My tribe has been here before. And, you know, it just so happens to be like generation. Yeah, I know, right? Like I feel like I'm on the journey that my ancestors took. It's amazing. I absolutely love it. But I have also back there a Marvel's Voices book, because we had the Kahori that came in with Mohawk speaking. So if you guys want to go on Disney and check out some Mohawk on TV, it's like it's amazing. And I can't even imagine what that must have been like for the members of the nation to see that and witness that, and it being so big. Like what? I hope someday that we get there too. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So if you, I know we've gone over, we've got surveys in the back, but also make sure that you check out information about Native Made Market. Our Voices Project is a proud sponsor, both Native Made Market and Indigenous Peoples Day. We have all of the information in the back. So we have all the information in the back, if you have a few extra minutes to check things out.
Yeah, so the Native Made Market, we are in our third year. I am so excited. We started just a little pop-up. So when you look around the Rochester area, we don't see any Native shops. There's no Native food. We have Indigenous people here. So we bring Indigenous creatives and entrepreneurs and educators and allies into this community from all different nations to immerse guests into the cultures in an engaging way. It's Small Business Saturday, which is intentional. It's after Thanksgiving, Native American Heritage Day, and Small Business Saturday to really shift the focus on the local small businesses. So if you are here that weekend, we will be at High Falls and Browns Race this year, and it'll be on November 30th from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. We are accepting sponsorships. I need money and to raise $20,000 and also volunteers. So I hope that you'll come see us at the back table. Thank you.
Okay.
everyone.